What did you know was a mistake as soon as you decided to do it, and why did you go through with it anyway? Story 1. I flunked out of my first school. I imagine if I'd stayed and gotten my degree, my life would have been a lot different. Instead, I ended up working for a few years, realizing the value of a degree and restarting my life. It's made me realize that kids shouldn't be forced into college right after high school. Some of them need to work, or travel, or whatever, to figure out for themselves what their path is going to be. 18 is way too young to point a finger at someone and be like, okay, now you need to decide the rest of your life. Story 2. If you take these pills as directed, you won't get addicted. So if I take one extra than what you've written on the label, they are addictive? Is this safe? Just take them as directed and you'll be fine. I was 16. The year was 2001. I spent the next decade in the grip of opiate addiction. After starting out only taking 2 a day as directed, the doc kept upping the dose. Story 3. I picked up a mouse when I was 12 and it bit me. I felt it was a mistake in that moment, shook it off, and picked it up again because I might as well roll with it since I already had been bitten. I got bitten again and my mom made me let it go. Pretty cool that I didn't get rabies or anything. Story 4. Got a haircut at a cosmetology school where they teach people to cut hair. I asked for my typical low fade haircut, and the student seemed confident until she realized she cut too high on one side. Tried to adjust the other side but made that side higher. This repeated for about 30 minutes until I stopped her. I played nice and complimented her. Guess I didn't want to hurt her feelings. Cost of the haircut was $5, but they should have paid me for that experience. Story 5. Getting married. I knew things were not right. He was not right and we were not good together. I knew he didn't like me for me, but the idea of me. Also, I never wanted to get married in the first place, but somehow my brain switched off. That is the most out of character I ever behaved and married a guy who had a business and 2 dogs with his ex who is bipolar, followed by the big reveal that he was cheating on me for a year with his married best friend. We got divorced. She divorced her husband and now is married to my ex. Story 6. I have made mistakes because I ignored my gut instinct to just get the hell out when you feel like you need to get out. I used to be polite and just sit and wait, see what happens. Nowadays at 53, I'm the first one in the queue to get the hell out the door. Don't ignore that gut instinct. Story 7. Staying long distance with someone I dated while backpacking for far too long. He convinced me to do LDR, then ghosted me unless he wanted something, and had no interest in moving to my country but also wouldn't help or support me with the visa process to stay in his. To add insult to injury, he showed up for my birthday as a surprise 10 months after I broke up with him and basically refused to accept we'd broken up. I eventually had to make up a fake BF to get him to leave me alone. Edit. Missed part of the queue. I knew LDR between Ireland and New Zealand was a terrible idea, especially with no plans for one to move closer. But he somehow had me convinced that no one would ever love me as much as he did. Story 8. In 1968, I dropped out of Columbia University to enlist in the Army. During induction at FT Hamilton, about 50 of us were in a large room sitting at desks to fill out paperwork. A very, very large SSG walked to the front of the room and said, "Write your name in the upper left corner of the paper." That's the side towards the windows. It was at that moment I started to realize I might have made a mistake. Story 9. Joining the military. I was in my 20s. I told myself the last thing I'll ever do is join the military. I put it probably one step above being homeless on the, if everything fails, I guess I'll do that, decline options on my head. I went to college at 18. University and I was doing well. I had financial problems, but I was doing okay having a full-time job as a full-time student. I had a free full ride because my mother made so little. She made an average of $13K a year. No, this wasn't the 60s or 70s when $13K was a lot. This was post-2010. I was in the honors college and doing fine. However, FOSFA required my parents' income. My single mother decided to stop filing her taxes, just said I'm not doing it anymore. So the free FOSFA cash flow was going to stop. I begged my mom to file and called FOSFA and talked to the university, did grants and everything. Nothing could be done during that time. And I told myself I'd rather drop out than be in debt to college. So I dropped out. I cried and regretted it. The financial freedom that came plus no debt was good in hindsight. So I tell myself, okay, you're a college dropout. If you're going to not have a college degree, you better work twice as hard. So I never had less than a second job. I worked 2 jobs, worked every day, no days off for 2 years, no matter how much I made working 2. 3 jobs, no time off, not even a weekend. I was looking at my life like I had nothing. I made too little to afford Obamacare or free health care. I made too much to go back to college. One day, my throat swelled. Not the inside, the outside of my neck swelled, and it was a physical lump, probably 2 inches in diameter. It started to affect my breathing. I never had health care growing up. I could not fathom going to a doctor. I couldn't afford it in high school. and I was scared of the cost at age 19. My then SO's mom, who was a former nurse who lost her license, gave me expired antibiotics. That was the only thing that helped. It went away easy. I cried looking at my bank account. I was making money, but not enough to live a real life. I was working maybe 80 hours a week for those 2 years. I managed because it was brain-dead labor. Eventually, I broke and cried because I knew I was losing my health too early. My mom gets health care with the VA, and it's more than what I had. So I enlisted active duty. As a mid-20-something, the military wasn't hard. It's also brain-dead labor with a little brainwashing thrown in. Since my mother never took me to a doctor and there are pretty much no medical records outside of vaccines, so I looked fine. I have had surgeries fully paid, gone to the ER fully paid, dental work fully paid. The first time I got a taste of that free health care, I was in tech school. I had hit my head and had a concussion, almost needed stitches. In my disoriented state, I refused an ambulance saying I can't afford it. I refused the ER and all medical attention, but had a massive bleeding gash in my head. I had multiple officers telling me it's paid for. I didn't believe them. And so an officer and an airman went with me to the hospital to prove I didn't have to pay. I watched all my friends in 2018-19's graduate college. I cried because I should have. I went for my CCF and then BA I'm still working towards, which is fully paid for. But in 2020, I got word of the severity of COVID before the general public. As a military, I was put ahead of others medically, and I didn't think I always deserved it. I got my salary and all my friends got laid off. Everyone on the outside was struggling except me. I saw that I had a safety net that no civilian did. I didn't enlist for patriotic reasons. I don't want to die in war. I don't want to fight and get shot. All the things I wanted were things I wish America just provided as a country. I wish free health care and college were a thing for everyone. I was told by higher enlisted if that stuff was free, then why would people join? It's terrible. So many people join because they just didn't have options. I felt a safety net that I never had growing up. I'm scared to lose it. The military has probably made my health worse and made me lose so much of the person I was. I want to buy a house, but I love so often I won't even be able to live in the house. I've lost so many freedoms, and it's the price I pay for the things that should be basics. I talk to others and they feel the same. I can probably get out with 100% VA for how hard my job's been on my body, and it's terrible. So many young people have health issues of a 50-year-old. I just want my health back. I never knew how rapidly the work ages you mentally and physically. A lot of people I talk to are like, I can't afford to leave and I'm not miserable enough to kill myself. It's like Stockholm Syndrome. I'm glad the government takes care of me though. Story 10. Staying with best friend and he asked me if I wanted to join him and his fiancée in a threesome. I politely declined as I knew it would end badly. Got drunk with them and they convinced me. 3 weeks later, they broke up after 6 years because his fiancée had fallen for me. It took 10 years, but I'm finally friends with him again, but I knew full well that it would be a mistake to go ahead with it when they asked. Story 11. One time I was driving with some friends and went the wrong way, so I decided to turn around in some driveway. There were stone lions on either side. I did a wide U-turn and everyone in the car screamed, "You're gonna hit the lion." I didn't care and just kept going. I hit the lion anyway. Story 12. Drunkenly trying to jump from one concrete bollard to another. I made the first jump, but the second one I started to fall and immediately felt this awful dread calm of, oh, this is how I die. Caught it right in the center of my chest. Smashed my sternum and ribs. Sat on the floor unable to speak or breathe properly while my friends freaked the out and dialed an ambulance. I would have been worse off if the 3 necklaces I was wearing hadn't helped catch and cushion the blow. I had the imprint of the crucifix on my chest for weeks. Story 13. I am starting a late-night binge-watching session when I know I have an early morning the next day. As soon as I hit play on the next episode, I realize it was a bad choice. But the excitement of the show and the desire to see what happens next can be too tempting to resist. Story 14. I had a brilliant idea for an April Fool's prank. At the time, I was working at a snack bar at a local ice hockey rink, and I decided to return in the middle of the night before April Fool's Day and install a 3-feet-tall ice sculpture of a fish at center ice. Wouldn't the morning Zamboni driver just love that? The ice sculpture was in a freezer in the snack bar. I had already talked 2 girlfriends into helping me. We had a few hours to kill before heading to the rink, so we decided to make a dummy out of old clothes and a Halloween mask. We would decide what to do with it later. At 3 a.m., we returned to the rink. I had a key to the front door, so getting into the building wasn't a problem. The problem was, the key to the snack bar was in a desk drawer in the front office, and I forgot that they had just installed a new security alarm for the office. It was one of those alarms that gives you a minute to unlock the door and then punch in a security code. I had a key to the office, but I didn't have the code. My girlfriends were like, "That's too bad. Looks like we'll have to go home." but I wasn't ready to give up. So I tried to convince them that I could get inside the office, grab the other key, and lock up again before the alarm went off. Of course, they tried to talk me out of it, and of course, my impulsive ADHD kicked in because I was sure this would work. So I unlocked the door, ran in, grabbed the other set of keys, and ran back out to the lobby. Success. But it was a silent alarm that immediately notified the local police, who showed up with guns drawn a few minutes later, just as we were struggling to carry an immensely heavy ice sculpture of a fish across the lobby. My girlfriends were furious with me. For years, they would remind me that yes, the cops did indeed have their guns in hand. What the hell were you thinking? The police had already tried to call the owner, but he was out of town, so they called the next person on the list, who was, of course, the Zamboni driver that I was trying to prank. He showed up a few minutes later and vouched for me so the police wouldn't haul us in. But he was pretty pissed because he had to come back to open the building in a couple of hours. So I told him to go home and I would lock up. The ice sculpture never did make it to center ice. There was no sense in trying because the Zamboni driver already knew about it. Instead, we dumped it in one of the urinals in the men's room. But remember the dummy we made? We placed the fully clothed dummy face down in a pile of snow behind the building and sprinkled a few drops of red food coloring in the snow. The poor sleep-deprived Zamboni driver returned to work a few hours later and was convinced that a drunken hockey player had hit his head and passed out in a snowbank. So the day wasn't a total loss. TLDR tried to prank a Zamboni driver and had to answer to the police. Story 15. Going sea fishing a second time. First time I didn't feel too well due to the swell, but after a few years I decided to try again. As soon as we got outside the harbor and beyond the breakwater, we were into 6, 8-foot swells, which only increased when the tide turned and the wind got up to force 7/8, and I hated every second of it. But you have to go through with it because all the others on the boat were quite happy to stay out. Safe to say I will not be sea fishing again. Story 16. A situationship that I wanted more of. I knew from the beginning and during the whole time that I was invested more than her, but I thought I could handle it. The whole thing lasted for about 1.5 years, where we saw each other at least once a week, and ended August 2023 when she found the love of her life and disappeared in a flash. I'm still picking myself up from that. I went through with it because I always held on to hope and did not have the self-respect and balls to just leave. Story 17. Telling a friend that I used to have a crush on him. Later realized I wasn't attracted to him in that way. He still keeps trying to wear me down and thinks we are going to get married someday. He doesn't take hints, so I'm going to have to be blunt with him about my feelings, and I'm not looking forward to it. Story 18. Climbed up a telescopic, unstable ladder after it had rained to trim tree branches. Tree was slippery and ladder was slipping a bit against it. Was fed up with no one taking responsibility for trimming it, and it had been obscuring my view for years. Rented flat, a flat block with different owners and no central management. Fell off and severed my left quadriceps tendon when my knees hit the concrete. Fool. Story 19. Overdosing on pain meds. I took too many too quickly. As I felt my heart flutter and thought it was about to jump out of my body, I knew it was a mistake. Why did I do it? I was honestly in so much constant pain, I was seriously considering launching myself out of the window with what little strength I had left. The uptake is it forced me to get the surgery I so desperately needed but had been putting off. Almost 5 years now, pain-free and medication-free. Story 20. Getting married at a young age. Knew it didn't feel right. Was getting pressured from my family to go through with it. 15 years later, 7-figure loss. Marriage was the worst thing I ever did, was a miserable existence, and ended up losing everything. Stupidest thing I ever did by far. Fellas, don't even think about marriage until you've watched a half dozen of your close guy friends go through divorce. Only then will you know what you are truly in for. Story 21. Nobody in my social circles appreciates my photography and art. Years of taking this in my stride. That's how arty stuff works, isn't it? And ultimately, it makes me feel good. I just shared my first serious self-portrait, implied nude, a dedication to beating a spell of dark clouds. I knew nobody would support it with a like or a nice message. Hurts, man. Not sure why I went through with it. I think it was to face that as well. It'll feel good in the end in this case, so I'm lucky and know it. Just core, ouch. Story 22. Loaned a boyfriend money and took out an advance on my credit card to do it at 22. He told me it was an investment in our future. He broke up with me a month later. I had to sue him to get some of it back. I guess it was an investment in my future, because based on FB posts from his now fiancée, breaking up with me was the best thing he could have ever done to help me. He would have stolen my credit to get things for himself. Story 23. Got married to the first wife. Thought settling for companionship was better than working on my self-esteem, and learned what I want is not equal to what I need. Someone described me as having a dog personality, that once I decide to give my loyalty away, It would take an act of God to make me change my mind. So despite the red flags, I kept operating, as if the engagement ring was equal to the vows I have not taken yet. Thankfully, I got out mostly unscathed, although I lost a good 10 years of my sanity. Story 24. I told a girl I really liked hanging out with that I had a crush on her, knowing that she had just started seeing someone. She laughed and waved it off and said nothing's changing and we're still friends. And then 3 months later, after still hanging out with me still every single day, told me I made her feel unsafe and that her boyfriend felt disrespected by it. I knew telling her I had a crush on her was a mistake and did it anyway, and now I have one less friend. Story 25. So I am 23, I have hypothyroidism, PCOD, fatty liver, and kidney stone. So 2 months ago, my aunt gave me antibiotics for 5 days for painful inflamed tonsils or sore throat. After take 3 days, I feel good I left because I was stupid. I don't know, doctor didn't said anything. Then as months, I was feeling sore gland and collarbone. My mom forced me to take leftover antibiotics of last month. 3 days I took. Now I am feeling scared. I saw online about antibiotics resistance and superbug, and I did stupid things ever. I'm sorry, I don't know what to do. I'm scared. Story 26. I bleached my hair all over. No experience with 40 volume developer. Barely even looked into it. No, I didn't start at the ends and go up to the roots neither. I didn't even know what toner was. The Sally's Beauty employee looked amused and shocked all at the same time when I went back in to buy permanent brown dye. My hair was 50 GD shades of orange. I went through with it because I really wanted blonde hair, so I could dye it different fantasy colors like light pink. Story 27. Bailing my second husband out of jail. I did it because I had bailed my first husband out of jail and I figured I owed the second one at least one. But in hindsight, my first husband was 21 and it was for bull. My second husband was 35 and had chosen to drive intoxicated. I ended up kicking him out 6 months later anyway, but it would have been a lot easier if I had just packed his stuff up while he was in jail. Plus then, I wouldn't have had to show up to the court date to get my money back, which luckily I did. Story 28. Getting together with my ex, we were friends for years. I knew about all her issues, and when something happened between us, I decided to run with it because I'd been closed off and single for a few years. Turned out to be the most emotionally abusive relationship I ever had. I knew it was a bad idea, but I'm glad I did it. I learned a lot about myself and the world around me. Story 29. Buying a house with my ex-boyfriend. We had been together a couple of years. A lot of our friends were buying. My lease was up, and he was adamant that renting was a waste of money. The first moment I was alone after the deal was finalized, I burst into tears. It was like I suddenly realized I didn't want to be with this person for the rest of my life. I knew it was the wrong decision, but everyone was so excited for us, and we would have lost our deposit. So I pushed my feelings aside and went through with it. We only lasted a year in that house before finally breaking up. It sucked and was a super expensive lesson. Story 30. I've been at my current job for 2 years after leaving my last one of 9 years, and within a few weeks of starting this current one, I knew I hated it. I'm making a little more money, but it is drastically affecting me mentally and emotionally. I'd like to change careers, but I'm 34 and have a family, so I fear it's too late. Story 31. When I decided to have an affair with my brother's wife, long story short, we were living together in a remote rural home with nobody but ourselves for company, while he was out driving a truck for weeks at a time. We had been close friends for a few years at this point, and our isolation and shared alcoholism brought us even closer. It was only a matter of time before we fell into bed together. At the time, I justified it to myself by thinking about all the times he bragged about cheating on her whenever we got drunk together. But that's no real excuse. I did it because I thought I was in love, and that made me stupid and selfish. Story 32. Getting back with my ex because I love him. Still do. He's currently pretty distanced, which is never a good sign, so I'm already preparing for him breaking up. We're not actually together, but it very much feels like a relationship. If I'm lucky, he'll just tell me that he wants to be alone currently, which I can definitely understand because people are exhausting. Story 33. I married my first husband. I went through with it because my father had just had a massive heart attack and almost died at the dinner table. He told me that I had to do it because he might have another heart attack and it might kill him. Right after this, one of my uncles suddenly died of a heart attack. Getting pushed into this bad choice ruined my whole life. Story 34. Dated my now ex. I knew the major points of her story. Damaged beyond belief. Toxic AF. Narcissist. Why? She was hot AF, and sticking it in crazy can sometimes be fun. I needed a vacation, I guess, from the seriousness of what I was doing with life. Also, I just kind of want to make sure you understand. She was absolutely hot AF. If I had the choice to do it again, I'd cut it off after about 6 weeks and then go back in time with my time machine and do it one more time before moving on. Story 35. Selling our family's home and moving across the state to be closer to my parents. Ever since our child, their only grandchild, was born, They'd been grousing over the distances for visits. We're family. Lots of guilt over only seeing their grandchild a few times a year. We'd had issues with my parents in the past, but over the prior several years and some visits and family vacations, things appeared to have improved. We seemed to be getting along much better. So, I put in a work transfer to a city a couple hours from them. We were expecting it to take 1.5 years, but due to a clerical error, it came through in only a few months. Instead of having time to plan and save for the move, we had to scramble to sell our house and use the profits to pay for the across-the-state move. On the day of the closing, with our U-Haul full of our life sitting in the driveway, my wife and I stood inside our little, beautiful, now empty home, and she said, "What have we done?" But we went through with it and left that day. This was December 2016. Trump was about to become president. Well, we arrived in our new city to find my parents had gone full MAGA. It was like he'd given them permission to be the absolute worst version of themselves. The racism, intolerance, ignorance, fear-mongering, conspiracy theories, etc. was amped to 11. And we discovered that our new city was filled with people who thought the same way they did. We'd literally sold our home and uprooted ourselves for them, and were met with disrespect, disdain, gaslighting, and toxicity. We learned quickly that family is just a meaningless word used to badger and cajole people to do things that aren't in their best interest. We got suckered and we soon knew it. This ended up being the darkest 7 years of our lives. By 2018, the family was falling apart. By 2020, I'd gone no contact with my parents. By 2021, I was putting in work transfers again. In 2023, we were able to finally get out, move clear to the other side of the country, and life is once again great. However, it's likely we'll never be able to own a home again. I also fully blame myself for everything that happened, and I'll never forgive myself for putting my wife and child through that mess. Story 36. My mother once cooked up some pre-made ravioli she bought to see if we liked it. Since we never have ate it before, we didn't. I don't remember the brand, and it wasn't like it expired, but its taste was straight up the most disgusting one I ever ate in my life. Everyone in my family who tried it agreed that it tasted awful. Still, I dislike throwing away food unless it has expired, so despite the fact I feel like throwing up, and that it took a lot more time than I usually need to eat, I managed to eat everything. However, I will be starving with literally nothing else to eat before I agree to eat those ravioli again. By the way, I was the only one in my family that actually ate everything. Everyone else gave up after tasting it a second time. Story 37. Finishing an unfinished garage because I thought it would give me ideas, skills, and keep me less sedentary. In the end, I realized that a company with better tools, like a scaffold instead of a ladder, can do it faster and safer. I could have just worked out and tried to make money instead, but I'm going to muscle through it to see whether there's anything else I can learn from it and just get the sense of accomplishment. Never again, though. Story 38. Getting married. I didn't really let myself actively think about it at the time, but I knew in my gut that it was a mistake. Some of my family and friends also expressed reservations and asked me if I was sure it was what I wanted. I insisted that it was. I went through with it for many reasons. I thought I'd never find someone who loved me like that again. I wanted children. I didn't want to disappoint people. I had invested so much time and energy into the relationship. Other than not leaving sooner, I have no regrets. I have 4 amazing children, and now I'm divorced and working toward my best life. Story 39. I was actually happy at my one job, but part of me knew there was no advancement there. One day, the one manager from the company next door came over and offered a $1 more an hour initially, and an assistant manager position after 30 days. Company policy. I would start training for that position right away. I said yes and told my boss, who was glad I was getting to move up because it would probably be at least 9 YRs before that opportunity would come at our place. Right after the first day, I really regretted it, and the company informed that manager the store would be closing in 60 days. So no, there was not need for an assistant manager. I worked there for that time. Because the other place had to replace me, there was no going back. Story 40. Quitting my job. It was long hours, they kept cutting the pay, and it was giving me night terrors level anxiety. But after quitting in February, I've been through a string of dead-end jobs that don't pay nearly as well. If I didn't have kids, it would be a little easier to maneuver, but finding a job that pays well, especially since I don't have a degree, is proving to be hella difficult. Story 41. Ooh, man. Just realized it. I was staying up to talk to someone when they got off of work and shouldn't have. I got home tonight from ER trip, was super tired and in pain, and wanted to reply to messages. I broke my own heart again, realized I wasn't anything. I went through with trying to talk because I wanted him in my life so bad. It's my fault. Story 42. For anyone who actually makes it this far down the comment thread, My moment for this was when I blew myself up. It's the classic friend pours some petrol on a fire and someone lights it who gets blown up. This was probably a 6x4 circle fire pit. I was using a tiny BIC lighter. The petrol had been sitting for around a minute in the fire pit. I decided to lean everything over it and light this bad boy from the middle. I knew it was a mistake when I saw the spark come out of the lighter. I remember seeing it and just thinking, oh, at this point he knows he has Ed up would have been perfect. I went through with it anyway because I did not have time to reevaluate my life decisions up until that point. Second-degree burns, legs, torso, arms, face. This cheap dress had melted into my skin, worst pain I have ever been in. I proceeded to light a fire with a bit of petrol a few months later, with a very small amount, from very far away. Stuff's gonna seem like a mistake in the moment and after, probably almost every time, but as long as we learn from them, we always come out all right. Story 43. My master's, I did it in film studies instead of doing a practical master's for more experience. I was so desperate to stay in education despite my mental health, I clung to the one that said yes. I had a massive breakdown about it in the first months, but eventually settled. I had fun, but still regret it because I have no job prospects in my studied industry. Story 44. Accepting my last job offer. Company was in the middle of a buyout, which should have made me wary. The last 2 companies I left were good companies that went to because of buyouts. I took it because I needed the money, and also figured since I wasn't going to be set in the old ways at this place, I wouldn't have as many issues with the changes the new management made. Turns out the new company went in an even stupider direction than I figured by adding pointless efficiency reports and needlessly complex steps in a completely new computer program that could have easily been done in existing software. And to add insult to injury, they got bought out. So they get to change everything around again next year. I was absolutely miserable with the new organization and noped out. At least I was smart enough to go on good terms this time, instead of embittered and depressed like the last 2. Story 45. I was looking for some car parts and noticed a box on a high shelf. I reached up and could just barely move it forward off the shelf with my fingertips. There was no backing out. There was only enough time for a single thought. This is going to hurt, as the box fell between my outstretched arms and directly into my face. Story 46 took out a massive loan to move abroad when I knew that wasn't going to happen. In debt now, barely scraping by. I went through with it because my ex insisted on it and that this would change our lives, and I did not want to see them upset and wanted to keep the relationship together. Story 47. Pulling that wheelie in the middle of nowhere in a private, unkept mountain road. I was going on vacation. Ended up spending a month in a hospital hundreds of km away from home. Not exactly what I expected, but a vacation nonetheless. Bike's okay though. Luckily, my spongy, weak body was there to cushion the crash. It only broke 5 bones, and it will take me at least a year to walk on my own. As a passionate jogger, this really hurts my sanity and my weight. I'll be back on my bike next spring. Story 48. I went to an outpatient day clinic for an eating disorder back in 2018. The whole time I drove there, I was screaming and crying because I didn't want to do it. But I did it because my parents and other family and friends expected me to do it to get healthy. It was awful. A literal lockdown clinic. The windows wouldn't even open to give us a breeze in the beautiful summer weather. We had to eat 3 meals a day in a room full of strangers with rules like keeping our hands above the table line and no fidgeting or anxiety-like behavior, such as picking at your nails, shaking your leg, etc. I could go on, but long story short, the clinic is now defunct. I went for 1 day and never went back after they wouldn't let me leave until I called my mom and told her I hadn't participated in those days' meals. I was too nervous to eat, and they forced me to drink a Gatorade before they would surrender my car keys to me. The next day when I didn't show up, they called my mom and told on me low. If anyone reading this remembers the Buffalo Center for the Treatment of Eating Disorders, if you worked it, you absolutely suck. If you were a patient there, I sincerely hope you went to a more qualified treatment center. Story 49. My choice for doing MS in a university with no scholarship, but with great metropolitan location, by rejecting a university that offered me almost full fund, but with not so good kind of rural location. The stress I deal with for managing the tuition fee and living expenses is absolutely not worth it. And I regret it every day for not choosing the second university. Story 50. The moment I saw the cancel button glimmering like a beacon of hope on my latest online order was the instant I realized I just bought a 1,000-piece puzzle for a team-building exercise, knowing full well I'd be the only one left with the pieces. I clicked it anyway, fueled by a mix of desperation and denial, convinced it would somehow spark a connection, or at least a good story for the next awkward Zoom meeting. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Now I'm just a one-man puzzle army fighting to assemble memories nobody else wants to share. Story 51. Bought a house with someone I should have broken up with months before but was too scared to hurt her feelings. When it came time to pack up and move out of my house and move into ours, I was chugging scotch straight from the bottle and crying on my kitchen floor. I knew it was a mistake. Less than a year later, I was moving out and had to start all over again. Man, that gut feeling gets real strong. Why do we ignore it? Story 52. I'm doing it right now. I took a special class to learn how to do something specific for my job. My company paid for it. It involves a lot of in-front research, testing, and analysis. Since then, I've been the person who does that specific thing. We had someone new come in who has 2 maybe years of experience in my role, who shadowed me the last time I did this specific task. She asked me after to talk her through how it all worked, but I said I didn't think it was a good idea. It would be better if she took the class instead. Recently, she's on a project I haven't been a part of, but was told I'd be doing that specific task. Yesterday, she messaged me asking me to look over her progress for what I had been expecting to take part in. I didn't feel comfortable being involved if I wasn't leading the task. It would take a lot of time to hold her hand through the entire process. I told her I couldn't help her. I'm talking to my manager today about it, who I am fairly certain will tell me to just help her anyway. I plan to refuse. It's probably pig-headed of me and it might get me fired, but I just can't do it. Honestly, this company has been slowly circling the drain, and if they decided to lay me off today, I'd feel an immense sense of relief. Suffice it to say, I'm looking elsewhere already. Story 53. I got a tattoo as a gift, and I carefully planned out the artwork, knowing that it would take 2 sessions of 5 hours to complete. As soon as the needle started buzzing, I realized I had made a terrible mistake, as my pain threshold is shallow. However, I knew that there was no turning back once I began. Fortunately, after about 30 minutes, the endorphins started kicking in, and I could relax somewhat. It was worth it, though. Story 54. I grew up as a single child, always getting remarks from others believing in that stereotype saying, "I'm a spoiled kid. You get whatever you want." But in reality, I couldn't even get a good night's sleep while hearing my mother screaming while being assaulted by my dad. I would ignore it, thinking it was just a natural thing in households for grown-ups to argue and fight often. But it didn't take long for my dad to put me in his victim zone too. He was a narcissist, could only think of himself and what others think of him. One summer day, 2020 if I remember correctly, me and my mom came back home after a trip to visit my grandma, who unfortunately passed away during our visit, only to be welcomed by my dad hurling insults which triggered my already heartbroken mother. That same day, we decided that it was enough. We waited patiently for the night to come. The moment my father's eyes closed, we were already at the train station, on our way to her family. I lived 2 years with them before we could get our stuff together to get a little apartment for us. After that incident, my father always tried to contact me, but I had to cut him off to save my own self. I still receive calls from him every day, but hey, that's why Do Not Disturb was made, right? I can't be so sure if that was a mistake or not, but I can't stop feeling bad for him, even after all what he had done. P.S. He grew up in an abusive household too, so that's what maybe fueled his narcissistic father behavior. I really hope to stop that cycle of abuse in the future. Story 55. I've had numerous exes try and get back together. My answer is always no, but way back when it first happened, I said yes. I knew I shouldn't. I understood that trust had already been broken and that this person was untrustworthy. It did last another month, but it was like just sitting around waiting for a bad movie to end. I was partly relieved when I caught her messing up again. It freed me from all the back of mind worrying of whether she would or not. Now I just freely and easily tell everyone no regarding second relationship chances. Story 56. I installed something for a friend I knew wasn't going to work well, but I completed it anyway. I left the house with my wife telling me I needed a check to pay the mortgage. I figured I could return later to make it right. Over a year went by and I apologized and gave them the money back when my wife and I spilt. I wish I would have just told them I couldn't do it until I had the correct parts. Story 57. Getting into a long-distance relationship. I knew the chances would be slim to non-existent for it to work out, especially once I was in the relationship, but she's a wonderful person and not trying would have meant not knowing, so I tried, didn't work out, now I know. Before anyone asks why it didn't work out, she was impatient. She was in her late 20s and I'm in my late 30s. Before I marry someone, I want to live with them for a longer period of time. After 3 years of long-distance relationship, she expected me to propose. Not going to happen. It's just way too risky, and I don't want to get a divorce. Story 58. Getting back with a girl who had absolutely crushed me by making all kinds of promises about our future, and then immediately walking those promises back as soon as we started dating the first time. On the one hand, I was just love blind and desperate for some kind of validation, and it ended predictably with her not being ready once again. But without making that mistake, I wouldn't have met my wife. Long story, but the girl I went back to encouraged me to apply for a big opportunity that my now wife was also part of, and our paths never would have crossed otherwise. Story 59. I was planning on getting out of the Navy from my shore duty station. Life happened and I thought it would be better to re-enlist. I didn't think it was that bad going back out to sea. First day walking to the sub, getting prepped for deployment, all of the bad memories I blocked came back. Story 60. Dating apps. I knew it would only take storage of my phone and time, all for nothing. It has been some months now and I still haven't got a single match. I went with it anyway because I thought, if I don't put myself out there for women, I'm going to commit unalive. And now that I see that my experience is relatable to the one of every other man, I know that it would be stupid to commit unalive for something this insignificant. Story 61. Putting up vinyl gutters. First piece went up and I hated it. Hated the quality and fit the entire time I was putting them up. But I had already purchased everything and it was in my garage. They were horrible the entire 2 years I had them on the house. Seamless metal is a lot more expensive, but 100 times better all around. The time, I guess, allowed us to save up money to spend on them, but hated it every time it rained. Story 62. I signed a lease on an apartment I didn't view in person. My anxiety about being homeless after leaving my university dorm was so bad that I made an irrational decision. The place was rented by 2 filthy people who clearly had no concept of cleaning. I lasted 4 days in and my mom had to come get me, and the landlord let me out on peaceful enjoyment as he was unaware of how bad the place had gotten. I didn't even have a house key and the girls never locked the doors. I have a lot of guilt about moving back in with my mom. She was in full support of getting me out of there, but I can't believe I have to depend on her again at 26 when I thought I was doing so well. Story 63. I married my first husband because I thought he wanted to get married. I was young, with my head in the clouds about marriage. He said, "Can you guess what I'm about to ask you?" in a serious tone one day, and I said, "To marry you?" He probably thought I wanted to get married, and I thought he wanted to get married. And without any real proposal or discussion about it, he got me a ring, and we were engaged. Naturally, I planned a wedding, and just as I was about to walk down to meet him with the minister, my gut was in knots. This didn't feel right, but I chalked it up to nerves, and everyone was watching me. I felt obligated to continue. Afterward, I felt fine, and everything returned to normal. Now I tell brides that if their gut doesn't feel right, pause and take their time to figure out whether it's just nerves or their gut is saying, "Don't do this," and don't feel badly for telling the groom, "Not today." Story 64. I texted my ex while I was drunk. Texting turned into a call. We ended up back together. Why did I go through with it? I've been in love with this girl since 2017, and that I still feel this way now tells me that I meant it when I said it back then. We didn't end things in a bad way either. We just weren't in a good place for one another at the time. A lot has changed since then, and things are going great so far.